So before I dive into my climate change stuff, I wanted to explain kind of why I have my channel. It's been bugging me that I don't actually do it, and I don't want to ham it into an actual video about all the other presentation stuff that I'm going to do. I have my cat in my arm here, so I'm not taking this overly serious, but I wanted to explain why I set up the YouTube channel, and the short answer is that I love science. I mean, I love the technical aspects of science. I love reading papers. I love challenging my base assumptions. Every single time my worldview is altered, that I all of a sudden am corrected on something, or I have this deep understanding of something, it's like getting high. It's the greatest experience in the entire world. You get the people that'll do, I don't know, whatever fucking drug it is that you pick your drug of choice, and they'll go, oh man, the universe is expanding. Imagine doing that, except you actually comprehend the fucking universe. It is awe-inspiring. And to me, as an individual, right, I mentioned that I've had Asperger's and a few things. The world doesn't make a shit bit of sense to me. It makes absolutely no sense. I do not get why people need to have you wear a certain color socks with your shoes. Why the fuck, as an engineer, do I need to wear a certain pair of socks with my shoes? Why does it have to be dark socks? Why can't I wear white socks? Why can't they be standard crew socks? Why do I have to put on these horribly uncomfortable shoes every time I go to work? I just don't fucking get it. It costs 3 times as much as a standard pair of fucking comfortable sneakers, and goddamn, my sandals. Oh, I wish I could go to work in sandals. I get it. If I'm dropping heavy equipment on my toes, one thing. But the rest of society's rules make no sense to me. And in this kind of lack of sense, I had a great experience to have my father, who was an aerospace engineer. He worked on the International Space Station and a whole bunch of other stuff, teach me how to know things, right? So you have this insane world which you can't understand. It makes no sense. You're always basically at war with it. You're not intending to upset people or offend them, but essentially you have these insights that you can't really you just think they're obvious to everybody, and you're not supposed to say them. That's tough to get used to. But my dad taught me how to know things, right? So I can't comprehend society, its social strata, its structures, all of those things. My wife takes care of that because she interprets the bullshit for me. And my dad taught me how to understand the world rather than the people living in it. And that's powerful stuff, right? That's good, powerful stuff that I love. So when I went into college and I started to improve my technical skills to pursue my love of science and mathematics, of information and understanding the universe, I ended up getting drawn into psychology. And I started off as a chemical engineer. I switched over to psychology about halfway through my chemical engineering program because I figured it's a lot less work. And when you listen to things like social science theories or papers or whatever, and you listen to things like climate science papers and a lot of other different fields, they're like farts in an elevator, right? If you were a scientist, a true blue scientist or engineer who's passionate about what he does, psychology and climate science and a lot of these other fields, it is legitimately like farting in a fucking elevator. They have this great plume that you go, wow, that's kind of woof. That is impressive, dude. And you're not willing to go sniff around their asshole to find out who actually did it and whether it's legitimately coming from one other person or not. And unfortunately, that's all this field is. It's nothing more than a fart in an elevator. There's nothing behind it. There's no substance. You're not going to go sit there and take a douche in a little while. It's just nothing but little, what is it? Crop dusting as they go along. They live, headline to headline, and they wonder why people don't respect them. But the problem is that for the real fields of science, we understand the issues, other people don't. Because nobody wants to dive into the papers in your 5-minute news segment or YouTube video or whatever and actually go, yeah, this is why it failed. Your sample size, it's too small. You actually sat there and tested the theory that you're basing everything off of, and you found out that it actually failed. I no joke, I have a paper that had a larger sample size than all of the other papers that fed into it. It tested the core basis and assumption of these papers and falsified it at the 95% confidence interval. I have that, and it's a footnote in this fucking paper. The paper also would have, like, this paper in particular had a like half-page abstract, which when you actually read through it and pulled out all of the political ideology, it was left with like 2 or 3 sentences about what they did and what they found, and it wasn't even that they controlled for variables. They just kind of said, we find this offensive, and that's... somehow this passes peer review. And this is the kind of shit that ends up taking people like me who love the scientific process and making us mad. Right? It legitimately makes me mad. It's not... I don't have an issue if you want to do your shitty-ass research methods. Just don't call it science. And unfortunately, they do call it science. They do say that this is what we're doing. And then they push their theory, and it's picked up by the people who have the similar political ideology. And then it cascades out of control. It's debunked half a dozen times, but nobody actually gives a shit about the debunking. And this requires people to go in, wade into the trenches, pull out these papers, and rip them to fucking shreds. But nobody wants to do that on a cable news show. There aren't a lot of YouTubers who have the ability to do that. I know this shit is dry and boring when I do this stuff, but it's important. Otherwise, we don't know anything. And that's the critical piece here, right? I like knowing things. I like diving into these papers because even though I am 90% sure when I go and read a paper that I get linked to on Twitter, that when I go to the source document and I read its methodology, it's going to be crap. You know, I've seen... You are a racist if you believe that black people and white people have the same rights. That was like the finding of a paper or its test of racism. You know, it's amazing what passes, and because of that, it's now you've gotten these bizarre fucking abstracts, absolutely bizarre abstracts, like feminist glaciology. Let's examine shit through the lens of feminist glaciology. We have to push back on these things, and we have to push back on these things, this dry, boring bullshit, so that we don't get those really weird fucking... holy shit, we actually spent $500,000 on this reactions. Every single time we produce something in science and we say, hey, this is good, and people act on it or they work to it and it turns out that it's complete bullshit, we have wasted not just the amount of time that was time and money that was spent on the study, but also all of the additional costs associated with reacting to bad science. And that's why I am here, because you have people who are tarnishing something that is, I mean, I'll be honest, it's my coping mechanism. It's the way the world makes sense to me and I can function within it. They're tarnishing it for kicks because they want to talk about how they feel in their postmodernist ideology. And I'm not okay with that. You know, I will happily, and I have, legitimately, my boss gave me an assignment, said you have 2 weeks to fucking complete this. I walked into his office 3 hours afterwards, asked what I could erase on his whiteboard. He said, hey, you can erase anything. And I wrote out all of the equations to prove the entire Navy manual wrong. The Navy manual of rules and regulations that I have to work to, I proved it wrong, mathematically, on the board. And he turns around and says, what the fuck is that shit? I said, that's the mathematical proof that we can't do this, that it isn't adequate for what it says it's trying to do. And I had to accept the fact that people didn't give a shit, that the rules be the rules. And this is how science operates in modern society. Now, you have these people who say this is a scientific process, this is a mathematical process, this is blah, 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 blah. And in reality, when you actually dig into the details, it's not. It's fun and it's fascinating to find these errors. It's necessary to find these errors, but ultimately, if you don't do it, if somebody doesn't do it, and maybe I'll only ever get, 50 subscribers at the peak of my popularity, I could die and be old and gray, but at least I will have done what I need to do to to stem the tide, to work on this stuff. And maybe it's going to be dry, and maybe it's going to be boring. If you like it, if you like, you know, in-depth analysis and commentary, like and subscribe and all the rest of that stuff. I apologize. I'm looking at the timer on this right now. It's like 10 minutes in. I'm going to do the best that I can to present the studies and their errors so that you can be as informed as you can and push back on politicians.